Psychotechnologies Live. Welcome to a very special episode of Psychotechnologies Live. Today we have a very special guest, Tim Yosling. So Tim is a frequent participant of retreats and was on the retreat that Elliot was on, the one where he came back and he was all like crazy and we had to like sort him out on air. So he was on that one. So Tim, I gotta ask you, was this retreat actually crazy and awesome and changing, or is Elliot just being dramatic?
No, it was fantastic, and this was my seventh retreat. Some of them have only been very short, one day, but this one was 5.5 days. Yeah, it was terrific. When Elliot asked me about this retreat, I said, "Oh, gee, I've been on quite a few. I don't think there's much mileage in it, but." It turned out to be one of the best ones ever. So I remember the first retreat Elliot went on, I saw him a few days later and I looked at him and I said, "What happened to you?" I want some of that. So, yeah.
So it was like 5-6 years ago.
Yeah.
That's pretty awesome. So tell us more about it. Tell us what did you see in Elliot, or what makes the retreat like such a good retreat? What made you come back 7 times?
Interesting. It's hard to remember exactly what I saw in Elliot, but I just saw an amazing positive transformation. He just seemed so much more with it, more together, more centered, more aware, more open. And I certainly wanted some of that. So
he saw me the last day of the retreat when I headed home. He saw me that afternoon.
Yeah.
So.
Oh, was it actually the same day?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. I thought it was a few days later.
So you had that like nice after retreat glow.
Yeah.
Yeah. I am a bit of a sort of self-help junkie in a way. Back in the 1990s, a friend started me off, gave me a copy of Personal Power 2 by Tony Robbins, and which has some good ideas. And but I sort of don't think there's kind of one thing that fixes everything and one mechanism of personal growth. You need to try lots of different things. So yeah, I tried the retreat and it was marvelous. One of the things, there's so many things that go on in these retreats. Like I remember the first one was based on this idea of head, heart, hara, which is just maintaining an awareness of, your body, your feelings and your thoughts without necessarily becoming engulfed in them. And I remember after that retreat, like just from 5 days or whatever of just trying to constantly maintain that awareness, I just came back from the retreat and I just felt so alive and so vibrant. It's just like, it's hard to describe, almost like I'd come alive. But that's just sort of one thing.
I feel like a lot of our lives can be spent like in our thought space, in our heads, which, the mental landscape is infinitely large and filled with thoughts, but then it's not as alive as the ones that happen in the body, like the sensations or the emotions that feel more livid, more like thoughts that are a bit dead. They happen very quickly and they're like very quiet and that's it. Whereas emotions really can move you or surprise you.
And also there's a lot of information in emotions and your bodily sensations. If you're in a situation, your body is telling you things and your emotions are telling you things. And so many of us are kind of biased to one mode or another. And we're missing out on so much. So just maintaining that awareness at all those levels, I think is tremendously useful and enlivening. What a lot of people do is kind of suppress lots of feelings that cause unpleasant sensations or whatever. So we're kind of shutting down a lot of ourselves, and that, apart from missing out on information and vibrancy, it also means that we're expending energy doing that sort of suppression. So that was one of the things that really I got out of the first retreat. It was kind of interesting because I felt really vibrant for about 3 weeks, and then I just started to feel like too vibrant. So it got a bit much because like all this stuff from my past started sort of welling up, and it was fortunate at the time I discovered this therapy called internal family systems therapy, with a great book by Jay Earley called Self Therapy, and that helped me like actually deal with a lot of this stuff that I'd obviously been kind of keeping a lid on, all these years. So that was terrific. Yeah. But every retreat's different, and I think Jesse, how do you pronounce his second name? Jesse Mackay, I guess.
I think it's McKee.
McKee, is it? Okay, Jesse McKee. He has a huge repertoire of things that he can do. As an example, on the last retreat, we did this thing called a family constellation, where some of the people had some issue with their family, and what he did was he got the person to pick from the people at the retreat, people to play the role of people in their family. Okay, I've just lost the video. Won't be a second. All right. So he would get the people to pick different people from the retreat to play the roles in the family, and then he would reenact certain scenes, and in particular certain scenes that the person wanted to have. Like they wanted their father to apologise for abandoning them at the age of 4 or whatever it was. And it was just amazing to how healing it was for these people.
Just like play out their childhood
to play out those scenes and to hear those words that he'd been desperately wanting to hear for 25 years from his father, as to I'm sorry, I just one day I got in my car and left, and he's really this particular guy is just a changed man as far as I can see. But that was just one of these sort of dozens and dozens of techniques that, having the group there, you can just do so many things. There's so much scope. Whereas in an individual psychotherapy session, there's kind of a structural limitations on what can happen. You can have a kind of transference to the therapist or whatever. But in the retreat, there's much more possibilities. So
I've seen, or there is a technique very similar to family constellation, where you get objects and you sort of place them around on a table or so to represent the people. Well, this person was standing here, this person was. So you can kind of do it without a person playing each person, but it's obviously not as good, not as full and rich, and as if you have people playing all those roles. So you can kind of do family constellation, like a constellation, but with objects.
And it is uncanny that people seem to have an amazing knack of picking the right people for the right roles. And then when they're reenacted, they sort of somehow magically pick the exact right words and the exact right gestures and so forth. Well, this is actually kind of one of the themes that from the last retreat was the whole idea of magic.
I mean, we even had in one of the constellations, a person kind of just got up and left. Like they were like, I need a break, I'm walking off. Yeah. And that turns out that was a person who'd done some abandoning or had left, wasn't part of the family. And so they said they felt bad about walking away because they were like screwing up the exercise, but that was actually quite perfect. Or the whole, like the person who set up their constellation picked this person who was gonna walk away or something to play that just perfectly.
Yes, it's
very funny.
Yeah, so it's a very rich experience, quite unique. I was.
How was it for you? Like, what was if
key learnings
you're comfortable sharing? Like, what was your drama like? Like, what was your play that?
You're asking me.
We didn't. He didn't. Tim didn't get to.
I didn't get to do a family constellation. So there were two big things that came out of it for me that perhaps I could talk about. One was with this guy whose father had abandoned him. I actually did a IFS thing with him about one of my many issues with food. I think I've found 13 previous sort of hang-ups that I have with food, because food is like a drug, really. It's a general purpose way of making feelings go away.
I definitely self-regulate with food, which is.
I mean, I was talking about this yesterday. It's not just that it makes feelings go away. It's that it literally distracts my body. There's food in my gut, and if there was something like an emotion here or an emotion here, or like I was stressed about something, my attention has to go there and can't do feelings anymore because it's busy eating the food. It's busy doing the digesting. The gut's doing its like normal thing, which means that it's literally like pulls me away from the emotion directly to the food, like problem solved.
Yes,
especially
that's
like sugar, gives you that nice feels good.
Mm. I mean, that's the feels good is separate from the like literal attention drag. Obviously, food tastes good, and like it feels nice to have sugar in your system, and like all these fun experiences. But
a friend of mine said to me that he can lose weight, but whenever he goes on a diet, he becomes depressed. And so he puts the depression down to lack of food. But my sort of hypothesis around that is that it's probably to do with the fact that he is depressed and he's using food to medicate away the feeling. So my big previous issue with food was after my grandmother died when I was in grade 3, my mother kind of became depressed and started neglecting us. And it became a sort of question as to whether there would be a food available or sufficient food available. And this went on for really till the end of high school. So I formed at that time this kind of what Jesse calls survival strategy, which was that if there was food around, I would eat it because I would never know whether there would be food around later. So that is a kind of dysfunctional strategy to have going into adulthood because there's food around everywhere all the time. So I had sort of this particular one out previously. But and I had got my waist circumference down by about 10 centimeters, for example. So it had been some success, but there was obviously something still there. And so we did with this friend at the retreat, we did another exercise and we found another one. And this was an interesting one in sort of terms of the internal family systems therapy, was that you can have these kind of survival strategies that you didn't invent yourself, but which you got from your family. So one of my family survival strategy was as a response to sort of low self-esteem and criticism, people would work very hard and to the point of exhaustion, and then they would feel very worthy and good.
Worthy of having worked really hard.
Yes. Yeah,
commendable for all the hard work.
I am a good person. I'm not like these frivolous people who party or whatever. And I sort of introjected that kind of strategy, but it's not a good strategy because you feel tired all the time. You feel hard done by. You're not enjoying life as much as you could, and so forth. And in my family, then you would get this second level of survival strategy, which was around, well, I've worked really hard. Now I can eat, and this is how I can enjoy myself. So food was a way of getting pleasure from life. So we sort of worked through this in the session, and I just sort of came up with ways of making my life more enjoyable without food, and just feeling free to sort of take a day off and relax and all those sort of things. So since then, I've been losing weight at a rapid rate, and without any feeling of duress or feeling of missing out. So that was one big thing that came out of the retreat. Because I think I went on my first diet in 1982. So this has been a rather long battle.
40 years.
Yeah. It's like intergenerational and a long life. And
yeah.
It seems like multiple things interacting with like the work hard and then needing to rely on the food. And
that's right. And problems cause problems, and the solution to a problem causes another problem, all that sort of. The other thing, which was more to do with the group dynamics that I got out of this retreat, was to do with intuition, because I've always had this belief that I don't have any intuition about other people, and that I had to kind of work them out, like by force of mental capacity or whatever.
Yeah, like calculations versus unconscious.
And reading books about psychology and all this sort of stuff.
Body language and
literally I've memorized the the rules of eye contact from Temple Grandin and blah blah blah. So and I made this comment at the retreat, and a number of people, and led really by Elliot, said, "Oh, but actually you have kind of amazing intuition, really." And I thought, okay, well, look, in this retreat, I'll go with this idea that I have intuition. So I was sort of free to try the idea out, and just go with my intuition, and I did, and it went fabulously well. And both during the retreat and since then, and it's sort of like a magic fairy has come down and given me this superpower that I didn't know that I had, because what looking at it later, what had happened was, and it's often the case that people have this intuition about what's going on in their family. And then they say, oh, this thing is going on. And everyone says, oh, no, you're mad, you're crazy. You know,
Don't call uncle that. That's rude.
You know, you basically get gaslighted and told that you're wrong and your intuition's, you know, you're a bad person. You shouldn't even be thinking that thing.
Bullied.
So I sort of, sorry?
You get bullied by your family.
Exactly, yes.
Yeah,
so I kind of suppressed this, and I had to go with another approach, which felt a bit safer, of being absolute, like working the whole thing out to the nth degree and being absolutely certain of what I thought was correct, sort of thing. So that has been a very transformational thing that's come out of this, of just feeling free now to just use my intuition. And again, it opens up a whole plethora of information that's coming in from the world, just in terms of being able to pick things up from people and so forth.
I imagine that's like part of the vibrancy for you is now you're seeing all these things in a sort of like agent arena relationship where you're able to actually now interact with all the intuitions that are coming in versus having to block them out and just do calculations.
And of course, your intuition works in real time as well, whereas, you know, working things out cognitively is a much slower process, and it's much more effort. So it works better, it's quicker, and it's also much less effortful. So that was a terrific advance, and that's, you know, the 7th retreat. So I think Elliot's trying to organise a couples retreat, but my wife's definitely not interested. So I won't be at that one. Because, you know, but it's funny because my wife grew up in this sort of psychologically boring family. You know, the children all had secure attachment. You know, they were loved, they were protected, blah blah blah. Nothing bad.
Those
happened.
People are the worst.
And so she doesn't. So she's like, she doesn't kind of believe.
They don't like talking about trauma.
Yeah, she doesn't sort of believe that all this stuff kind of exists. So you know, and that's it. It's like she's a natural. You know, it's like, you know, if you talk to my friend Les, who's very good looking, how do you pick up girls? And he said, oh, I could just go to a bar and girls come up and start talking to you. Like, he's a natural, so he has no skill, you know. So there's that.
A different kind of hardship.
Yeah. So that was very good. But, you know, everyone had their own sort of things that came out of it. It was quite, everyone would have I think, a unique story of what they got out of the retreat. I mean, one of the things I most love about it is that you really were able to get very close to people, in a very intimate with people who you would normally not have much of a chance to get to know. So I don't know about you, Elliot, but that was definitely a huge thing for me, that it kind of short circuits that. And even people that I'd known, like well, you know, the man from Melbourne, the clever guy from Melbourne, the people I've known for years, and I just got to know him so much better during the retreat. It was amazing. Like, you know, because
it's like a really like efficient way of intimacy, of creating intimacy.
Yes. And not only with the people there, but also, you know, giving the sort of belief that can happen as well. So that was very good. So you know, one thing we were talking before about the head heart hara, and how a lot of people, you know, especially like people in the rationality movement, which I think you mentioned, Daniel, you're involved in. A lot of those people are really in their head, and you have this often a neglect of the body and the emotional side of the person's being.
It's not really measurable so well.
No, and often people, it's a bit of uncomfortable zone and so forth. But you get a similar thing with spiritual people, that people are very into their sort of spirituality, and they neglect the other dimensions of themselves, you know, the thinking, even emotional. And you often get these huge blind spots in highly spiritual people that I think will be called a spiritual bypass. And that's often quite prevalent as well, that these people are very unbalanced and often blind to much of their own self. No, people will say things like, I do not experience anger because I'm a highly evolved spiritual being. Trust me,
I had a short
anger.
phase of that. Yeah.
Sorry?
I had a short phase of that where I was like, I'm a highly evolved spiritual person. All these emotions I don't experience them anymore. But yeah.
I feel like now
they always get you when you
it's
don't.
hard to make me angry, or like it's rare that I get angry, but it's definitely not a never.
No, definitely not never. Yeah. So what else? So that's quite a thing, is trying to get in touch with all those levels of your being, and people are often very resistant to that. The classic thing in any kind of, we all have trauma, and with any kind of trauma is that you come up with some bogus solution, what Jesse calls a survival strategy, and it's usually a pretty ridiculous strategy. If you come up with anything at the age of 6, it's not going to be that great.
Yeah.
But people are very attached to these strategies, and they fervently believe in them. So the people are often very resistant. So the big problem is, getting people to acknowledge that they have the strategy, and that's part of the internal family systems therapy approach as well, is just getting to the thing. Because if you can get to the thing and say, I have this strategy, which is like, as I mentioned before about food, I had this strategy, if I see food, I need to eat it because it might not be around later. It's just ridiculous on its face. But that was actually the strategy that I was executing.
Probably worked for a while too.
Yeah, it's like, as Jesse pointed out, often these strategies actually saved your life, even in many cases.
Yeah. I mean, I hear stories of like Holocaust survivors or people that were in the camps, and they'll have like these like weird hangups about food where like you can't waste anything, like even like stale bread, they won't let you throw it out, or they'll have like all these like canned goods stored somewhere that they never get through.
That's right. They can't throw away a stale old piece of bread. Even
you're describing my deceased grandmother from survived the Holocaust. I mean, she just interestingly, she used to grab the end of the loaf, like the crust, and that was the one that she saved. And like, there was last week's and the week before's and like crusts bread in the fridge all the time. There was like 10, 20 pieces of crusts in the fridge, which, obviously at the age of 95 or so, that seems a bit silly, but I'm sure earlier in her life and for various times that felt like a useful thing to be doing.
Yeah.
Not to mention the canned goods, which she also had.
That's right. But of course, the interesting thing is, if you went into her fridge and threw out all the crusts, they said, I threw out all that stupid crusts, they would probably freak out.
Well, they would just come back next week anyway.
Yeah.
Within a week, there'd be more crusts.
And I see this with people of my generation. I'm a baby boomer, obviously, and our parents sort of downplayed the risks of alcohol. And I've got a lot of people in my peer group who are alcoholics. And alcohol is kind of, again, a bit like food in that it's a sort of general purpose solution to bad feelings. And I sort of realized eventually that if you suggest to these people that they stop drinking because it's killing them, they don't think it's a helpful comment. They think that you are actually trying to take away the one thing that solves their life's problems. And they can get very upset with you, and they're very attached because in their belief, alcohol is actually the solution to their problems. Yes, it has some side effects like killing you or whatever, but
whatever.
But how are they going to get through today? Like alcohol is going to kill them in years.
Yeah, exactly.
The boredoms or the shame or whatever, the feelings are going to kill them today.
And all sorts of rationalizations come around it, and I only drink because I have a bad back and blah blah blah. So it's we sort of walk around with these wounds and these survival strategies, often forever. I've seen people go to their grave without really having sorted them out. So I guess sorry, go on. One thing we could talk about is the idea of magic, which is not really an archetypical rationalistic thing.
Yeah, Elliot's been hankering for some magic.
We have this gentleman who wrote this book is going to come on our stream and talk to us in a couple of weeks. It'll be very exciting.
Okay, so maybe we could do a bit of an intro to that.
Yeah.
So, magic, like people think, it's making spells and turning goblins into fairies or something.
Well, there's childhood magician, pull the rabbit out of the hat sort of.
Yeah.
Magic. And then there's the storybook, dragons and wizards magic. But those are the two magics that I know of mostly. Yeah.
So Jesse has a kind of different idea, and it's talked about in that book, Mastering the Core Teachings of the Buddha, that, there is another form of magic, which is about how you frame things, how you look at things. So, for example, say Nelson Mandela, rather than framing South Africa as a country of warring racial groups, he reframed it as, or at least while he was alive, he was successful in reframing it as one country. We're all South Africans, we're in it together. So that's a kind of form of magic. And you can apply that to other people as well as to yourself. And you see highly skillful politicians like, say, Paul Keating or Bill Clinton are very good at that.
It's like a narrative magic, or
creating a different narrative, or just helping people to think about something in a different way. There's also the sort of magic of intention, and I think in the book he talks the Core Teachings of Buddha, magic as kind of a way of magic spells as a way of kind of just reasserting the fact or confirming the fact that you have a definite intention that a thing happened, and having a firm intention that a thing happened, having a fervent desire that it happened, having an implacable determination that it happened.
Well, a lot of meditators use the phrase "for the benefit of all beings."
Yes.
May my actions be for the benefit of all beings, and they will repeat that intention a lot. They'll say it hundreds or thousands of times in the hope of making more permanent their intention to benefit all beings.
Yes, and I sort of have found that quite helpful. And that's there's a book by Napoleon Hill, Think and Grow Rich, which is really based around that idea of
like early manifesting style stuff.
Yes. I mean, this is not the secret. This is not just wishing something will happen, but you're creating.
I was thinking of the secret. Yeah.
Right. So there's a wishy-washy version, but there's something of a more concrete. If you spent 10 minutes every day focusing on a particular goal, be it earning money or losing weight, and you committed to that 10 minutes every day, at some point that 10 minutes got to include standing up and doing something about it. You actually got to activate your body and do stuff towards that goal. But obviously it starts with maybe I want to do that a lot and do many of those before they start happening.
And one thing Napoleon Hill does mention is that each morning you kind of think, what am I going to do today about that thing? What concrete action am I going to take? And, if you take concrete actions, like as Tony Robbins points out, if you take concrete actions on a consistent basis, something may well happen. And the third form of magic is this idea from the film The Peaceful Warrior, of that there is just so much happening, there is so much information coming in from the world, and you just need to be open to it. And it is almost like a form of magic as to what you can notice. So I think the baseball coach Yogi Berra said, you can learn a lot of things by observing. You can see a lot of things by observing. So they're more sort of forms of magic that might more appeal to rationalistic sorts of people. I think with Jesse, what was the part of magic that Jesse really emphasized, Elliot?
I mean, something I kind of want for my life is to perceive my world as a bit more magical.
Yes.
I live in the boring, rational, concrete world where I have a computer on my desk and that's just bizarre. But actually, I have this magical device that is connected to the whole world on my desk. Like, oh, that's actually kind of magical if I let it have the magical powers. And starting to appreciate, rather than having to know the inside workings of all the things, permitting or like having in my worldview space for the magic to just be there, and like maybe magical things will happen.
And I think you can also kind of have a magical sensibility about the world, just like the night sky or whatever it is. And I've been reading a lot of Nietzsche lately, and he originally was a kind of hardcore atheist. He wrote a book called The Antichrist, and he was very much against Christianity, for various reasons. But he did eventually conclude that we need some kind of spiritual, religious sensibility. And he wanted a kind of sensibility of the earth, or a religion of the earth, not a religion of the sky. His view was that, with Plato's idea of this pure world of forms, we kind of went astray by abandoning the earth and looking for sort of spiritual salvation in the afterlife. The idea that the earthly world is sort of polluted, sinful, blah, blah, blah. So Nietzsche was trying towards the end of his life to cultivate this kind of spiritual sensibility about the earth, just a sense of wonder and joy and so forth.
Yeah, that's in Judaism there's this concept of Torah lo b'shamayim. So like the Torah is no longer in heaven, it's been given to us on earth. And like that's where the action is taking place, and that's where the spirit and the spirit of what's happening is taking place.
All right. Oh, that's very interesting. There's a lot to that, because we kind of put the good things off to the afterlife, or we were talking before about the spiritual bypass, that is somehow we retreat from reality into a kind of spiritual world. But it's kind of, I did like the meditation course. It was kind of very nice, but somehow it just didn't seem really satisfying to me, because eventually, you hear all these stories about people go to Tibet or whatever for 15 years and become a high-level monk, and then they come back to Los Angeles. They get in a bingle in their car and they're in a punch-up. It's like nothing's really changed, back here on Earth. Kind of thing.
I do think, and like everybody has their own practice, obviously, but I do feel that if your practice isn't changing your life, then it's
a bypass.
I don't know. Like you're not really connected to the reality.
I want to maybe advocate for practices that get you away. So you meditate in such a way that you get away from your body or get away from your experience and have a nice peaceful moment. Much as that is getting away, and it could be a bypass, sometimes it's also good to like just getting out and then coming back. Obviously you have to come back and work out what to do, but getting away isn't always terrible. It's just if it's the only thing you do, and you like Ramdas called it, like what goes up must come down, right? So if you get away, you go up to some spiritual place, you're going to have to come down to earth eventually anyway. And that's when it becomes important to start making sure your life is good. The life you're living, the one you're coming back to, is the one you want to be living.
Yes, I remember my mother used to do meditating, and she would feel very calm and relaxed while meditating, but then she came out of it, she was back to square one. So that's not a positive. You go on a retreat, you learn new things, new skills, and then you come back to
interestingly,
you do your trauma patterns better. More refined, more clear-headed at creating all that misery.
I suspect that sometimes that pattern of like meditating, getting away, being peaceful, and then coming back actually makes everything worse. And in that sense, when you realize that it's worse or that it's getting worse, that's when you start trying to clean it up. You're like, oh, like my life isn't peaceful at all. I really have to do something about this. That can be like the ringing phone of like, hey, it's time to start cleaning up your life. Obviously, not everyone quite gets the message, but often I suspect that contrast that you can get between the meditating and the not meditating can be the push that people need.
Yeah, so that can be very useful. But sort of the analogy comes to my mind of the people who have like 3 glasses of wine every night.
Mm.
And it's actually stopping them from solving their problems in many cases. And meditation can often play the same role. So, but
well, it can also permit you to put up with life as it is. Oh, don't worry, I'll just go meditate later today and then I'll be fine. Like,
yeah, and it's an interesting thing because there was someone on the retreat who was actually still in an intolerable situation, and it's sometimes you just do need to find a way to get through the day. In terms of, like, you've just got a terrible job and you've needed to stay in that job to keep the wolves from the door or whatever, and that's all you can do. But the damage is occurring.
So one of my survival strategies is to disconnect from my body. So anytime things are too hard it's actually the trickiest one right now is anytime I get too angry, I just disconnect from it, and I can feel it there, but I'm not like in ownership of it, because probably if I was in ownership of it, I might be yelling or throwing things or doing something stupid like that, which is obviously doesn't fit in our society today. But as disconnected, I have a real problem because I then can't work with it because I'm so disconnected. Big problem. Still working on this one. But that's this is my survival strategy. I disconnect in order to get through the day, because otherwise I'd be too angry or something. And I'm working on like reprocessing and like getting bits of the anger out so that I can be with it, and so that I'm not already, like, if I'm carrying around this big bucket of anger and then someone like taps me on the shoulder, they may just cause the bucket to explode. So obviously looking at how to like empty the bucket in order to work with it better. But like that's bypass. That's like I need to bypass, otherwise bad things will happen.
And so it's really interesting that my mother died 5 years ago. My father died 20 years ago next year, and it's probably a terrible thing to say, but in some ways it's been very freeing to have my parents not around. And I had no idea the kind of hold that they had on me, just in terms of what I was and was not allowed to think and so forth. And so, most people's parents are still alive, and so you're still kind of in a situation that you can't necessarily really heal, because you have to still deal with that situation, and people still have that hold on you in various ways.
I mean, I think you told me nail biting, was it, Tim?
Yeah. When my mother died, I just spontaneously stopped chewing my fingernails, at the age of 62. And I just noticed, I have stopped chewing my fingernails.
Yeah.
It just like stopped. Like, it sounds almost like a stress response.
Yeah, I mean, and I've been doing that all my life, that I can remember. And I'd given up a few times. I could give it up, but it was just unpleasant not to do it, because it was just, relieve stress or whatever it was. And I would do it kind of secretly for the most part and so forth, but so as not to annoy people. But yeah, that was a most striking thing. And you sort of think, yeah, it's really quite surprising, but there you go. They say you should kind of live your life as though your parents were dead, but it's not as
easy as it is.
They have that real estate in your head, and once they die, then you can then start to kind of reprocess them, and I sort of, you can have mixed up feelings about your parents, that in many ways they let you down, but at the same time you can also at the one moment acknowledge the fact that there were reasons why they were how they were, their own issues and so forth, and in some ways a lot of the worst things they did to you were done with good intentions at some level. So it's very hard just getting back to what Elliot was saying, that you sort of these things just keep coming up, and very hard to heal. I'm just trying to think. So in terms of there's just been so many retreats and so many different kinds of things that have happened. Have you got any other sort of, well, what was your experience of the last retreat, Elliot?
I mean, I thought it was great.
Yeah.
I mean, it's hard to talk about these containers because the content, like, let's go do this exercise, is not at all what it's about, right? One of them we did victim triangle, right? And we played with victim, perpetrator, rescuer.
Yeah.
That was just not at all important. Like, that was just something we mentioned offhandedly. It's something that gave us something to do a bit. What was important was the people who said, yeah, that's me, I'm the victim. Or yeah, that's me, I'm the rescuer, and talked about their stuff and brought up their stuff. That was way more important. The like personalized, like, obviously, so I'm a rescuer. That's one of my roles. And I don't like the victim, and I find it very hard to be the perpetrator. Like, this is the shape of me. This is something about me that I have now found and I'm watching in everyday life if I'm leaning too far into any of these positions or stuck in one of the positions in that triangle. So it's like, for some reason, the personal stuff is way more important than the generalized, like the triangle, much as that was interesting.
That's right. It's quite interesting too, just seeing which of those roles you're not comfortable in. And a lot of people were only really comfortable in the rescuer role because it's a very safe role.
I think we also happened to have a lot of people in that container who were rescuer types.
Yeah.
Like happens to be like coaches or helpers or parent type. That they naturally we become the rescuer in some of those roles. Like, okay, we just had several of them in that container.
It attracts that sort of person, I guess. Yeah. Yeah, that's
so, like, personal stuff. Personal stuff is definitely way more interesting. I mean, the one big thing that I'm still playing with is trying to find the middle spaces. I hadn't realized so much, but I've done a lot of polarizing. So internally or in my head, like polarizing my relationship with things or polarizing the emotions. So like good or bad, but very strongly good or bad. And obviously all that meditating helps me to get to this good place and lots of good. But then there is in fact the bad stuff that's kind of hiding because it's polarized against the good stuff. And this is great because I have all of this good stuff, and terrible because I have this very difficult to work with bad stuff because I have such a polarized existence. So trying to now soften the polarity so that I can get the middle and sort of work through it. Otherwise, I kind of have stuff locked up behind a wall.
Yes, it's interesting. Like when you look at, say, the psychology, I'm not suggesting that you were abused, but in the psychology of being, say, sexual abuse, that often the abusers will become the perpetrators in the next generation. And because it's kind of a safe place to be. And, being the victim is just a horrible place to be. You don't want to feel that you are a victim. And, if you have sort of bossy people in your life who are telling you what to do all the time, then that's not a happy place.
I mean, so the interesting, I've been chatting to people about the victim triangle since the retreat, and people are like, well, victim's all right, and like rescuer's all right, but who wants to be the perpetrator? And I kind of think that's funny because through a slightly different lens, well, like the bad side of victim is you're the victim, like you're receiving all this bad stuff. You're like, oh no, why? The bad side of the perpetrator is you're the bad guy, like bad, I'm the baddie.
Yeah.
Bad side of the rescuer is that you feel very obligated and you are like stuck. I have to help, and there's like a weight on my shoulders. But then there's the good side of all three, right? The good side of the victim is it's all about me. The good side of the rescuer is I'm like the knight in shining armor, I'm the hero. And the good side of the perpetrator is like, I feel very powerful. Like there is in fact a good side and a bad side to each of those positions, independent of the, like, obviously the healthy triangle as well is something different, where the victim becomes the creator and the rescuer becomes the coach, which are healthier ways to be.
Yeah, so as long as it doesn't involve just sort of running away from acknowledging those roles that you've been in the past.
Right.
Because you kind of have to process those things.
Well, I mean, the interesting thing about like a model like this, like the victim triangle, or even fight, flight, freeze, and fawn, or like fear, anger, and sadness, is that if you look really, really, really closely at your experience, moment by moment, we're kind of made up by this like layering of like, now I'm the rescuer, now I'm the victim, now I'm the perpetrator, now I'm the, like, we don't look that closely, but we've actually got like moments and moments and moments where we swap and back and forth between these places. It's terrifying. Or like we stop, we're like fight, and then we're flight, and then we're fight, and then we're fight.
Yeah.
Like we jump around almost on the moment by moment in the physiology, which is kind of terrifying.
One thing that I didn't quite get there with the retreat was this issue of the alchemist. And, you know, we talked a little bit about this before, that I really fervently want to sort of grow this sort of capability. So in terms of Bill Torbett's hierarchy, the alchemist is the next level up from the strategist. And an alchemist is a person who changes the thinking about something, who can look at things in a completely different way and change their own thinking and that thinking of other people. Whereas a strategist, yes?
So like the strategist, like a systemic thinker, and then the alchemist is paradigmatic. Yeah,
so that's right. So a strategist would be say, oh, well, this company should not be actually a for-profit company. It should be a non-for-profit. That would be the extent of the strategist. A strategist will look at the organization, will be able to think about all the people involved, all that sort of thing, but it's sort of within a certain paradigm to a certain extent. Whereas the alchemist is, you know, you're talking about people like Nelson Mandela, Mahatma Gandhi, Václav Havel in Czechoslovakia, you know, where he was a dissident and then all of a sudden he was sort of invited to Prague to become president. You know, he just had created this thinking around, you know, the demise of communism or whatever, that allowed him to sort of do that. And I'll just like to get sort of your ideas about this sort of thing. So the idea, another way to look at this is if you read, say, the book Poor Charlie's Almanac about Charlie Munger, his argument is that most people interpret the world according to maybe 3 different models. So, for example, a person's model of politics would be goodies and baddies. That there's one side which is good, there's another side which is bad, and so forth. Or the same capitalism versus socialism. That, you know, capitalism is evil, all millionaires are evil, or whatever it is. Or they may have, say, a model that was predominant in my family was that the key thing in your relationship with other people is to determine who is the one with the moral ascension, who is the righteous one and who is the bad one. That is the key thing in any relationship, to work out who was good and who was bad and who was right. So these models are very restrictive, and most people go around kind of interpreting the world in terms of a very impoverished small set of models. And Munger's idea is that you should have, now the problem with these models is they're terrible, you know. But the problem with terrible models is not to not have models. The problem is to have lots of models so that you don't over-rely on any one model. And so he has lots of models, like obviously around finance, valuing companies, you know, how the world works, et cetera, et cetera. So that's sort of one way that you can, you know, be a person who thinks outside the square, because you can then bring to a situation a huge armory of different models.
If you got like 10 models, then, you know, they're going to give you a more stable, bigger picture in theory.
That's right.
If they're not correlated with each other, and all that.
You know, so in his, so he has and in the book he talks, in his speeches, he talks about, say, models of how people think. And, like you'd be familiar, Daniel, with all the sort of psychological biases that people have, cognitive biases, recency bias, incumbency bias, et cetera, all these are all models. And also the way another model is, like I said, in terms of financial markets, is that people get most of their opinions about the world from the people around them. So that's a model of how people think about, say, financial markets or about all sorts of things. I was mentioned to Elliot that, like, it's just amazing to me when you look at how attitudes to, say, homosexual marriage have changed since I was at school. If you'd said homosexuals should be able to marry when I was at school, like, you would have been hung, drawn and quartered. And now, of course, if you say the opposite, you would be hung, drawn and quartered. And then, like, what actual new information, like, just to be clear, I actually in 1973 participated in numerous gay rights demonstrations. So I'm not against gay people. The point I'm making is that popular opinion has changed dramatically, and really it's hard to point to actually what new information came along. Popular opinion changed because popular opinion changed, and this happens all the time. And, like, why is it that when you're in Australia and everyone says real estate can only go up, and when you go to Japan, everyone says real estate can only go down? Everyone knows these things, right? Except that they know the opposite. So that's a model. People get their opinions from other people in a very unreflective way, but they're very certain. And this is another, psychological bias that people have, is they're vastly overconfident. I don't know if you've ever done the ignorance calibration exercise, Daniel. People are massively overconfident in their beliefs.
Yeah, I think we did. We used to run something like that and think better.
Yeah, and it's kind of actually, it was interesting because when I've run that exercise with kind of non-rationality people, when you ask them to give a range for, say, the weight of a 747 aircraft, that they're 90% certain it's within that range. Usually it's only about half the time are they right. But with the rationality people are more like 80%. So rationality people are often somewhat overconfident, but not to the same extent as most people. So there's a whole lot of models around people's, how people think.
Unless you're doing prediction models like regularly, it's very hard to actually be accurate in your predictions.
That's right. And there are sort of meta models as well, which is like, how do you actually become good at doing a thing, making predictions, is that you need rapid, accurate feedback. If you don't have that, forget it. Right?
You need to be generating those feedback loops constantly.
That's right. And,
or narrowing. Yeah.
And this is why, like, for example, doctors, surgeons keep getting better until their 50s when their manual dexterity starts to deteriorate. But basically all other classes of doctors don't get better after 2 or 3 years out, basically because they're not getting feedback. I have go and get my
therapists are similar. I heard it was like 5 years. It's therapists and teachers as well. It's like,
and they think they're getting better.
They're
absolutely certain that they're getting better. And they're probably better at earning an income because they're getting feedback about that.
Yeah.
Or maybe better
at navigating the system.
So you sort of want to become, according to Charlie Munger, a kind of a bit of a magpie, and it's an Australian bird that sort of gathers things.
Gathers shiny things.
Gathers shiny things. So we gather all these sort of models. So you have a vast set of models that you can then put to use. So he talks about in financial markets that because of this herding of people's opinions, financial markets go wildly out of true valuation, both on the upside and the downside. And so if you take that insight and then you say, okay, well, I will try and find a way of valuing companies that is rational, and then I'll wait for the market, Mr. Market, to offer me the company at a very cheap price. Then you can do very well, as say Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger and his partner Warren Buffett have done. So,
value investing.
Sorry?
They do the value investing.
Investing, exactly.
They say, what is this actually worth? And
yes.
If they can get a deal, then they'll do it. He keeps
That's right.
like billions of dollars in cash or something, I think, just to
Yes.
like buy stuff when it goes on sale.
Oh, when you want something on sale, you need the cash available to buy it.
But of course, the key thing is
crazy,
that
yeah.
when something is a bargain, it does not feel like a bargain. And this is
Right.
why it's a
It
bargain.
feels like it's crap, right?
It feels like like if you tell people that you bought the stocks that Warren Buffett buys, like people will say, you are an idiot. Everyone knows that's rubbish, blah, blah, blah. So, but, then you say, well, like, what process did you go through to just come to that conclusion? And
Right.
It's just like,
well,
everyone
everybody's
knows
selling it, so
Yeah.
it must be bad.
So, like one possible case in point, I know Elon Musk's a very controversial figure, but all this noise about Twitter, that the price of the Tesla stock has gone down enormously. And it doesn't seem to be a thing that reflects anything about the fundamentals of Tesla. They're still growing at 50% per annum. They've still got by far the highest margins on electric vehicles of any manufacturer, blah, blah, blah. So this is possibly a case in point where you need to make a call as whether this is just noise or whether it means something. Of course, the contrary argument would be that Musk is becoming a overstretched CEO of 5 companies, and that he's.
I think Musk is fundamental to people's valuation of Tesla, and so if he's distracted by Twitter or if they think he's going to drop,
and so you need to make a decision as whether that's to what extent that's a significant issue. But I'm just giving the example that it's not a thing where it's going to feel like a great move. Everyone will tell you you're an idiot. Musk is a sort of not literally Hitler and blah, 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 because he voted Republican once. It's amazing to me. He voted Democrat all his life, according to him. He voted Republican once, and like all of a sudden he's literally Hitler. Amazing.
Yeah. Well, I think that's the model thing, right? Like if you're modeling good guy, bad guy.
Yeah, exactly. Yes.
What side are you on?
And I get this thing with the global warming issue. I spent 3 months and I just researching it. I did deep dives on what I thought were the 3 strongest skeptic arguments, and I basically found there's no there. I did, and I tell people this, and they're like, "Oh, great, Tim. I thought you were one of the good guys." And I say, "Well, actually, when you look at the early IPCC reports, they were overconfident in their estimates, and then they're starting to have doubts about you, grave doubts." And then I point out, well, actually doing a renewable economy looks like it's going to be damn hard. Then they're sort of suddenly people are like, oh, I thought you were on the good team, and now you're one of the bad guys. They're just trying to parse you as to which gang you're in.
Yeah. I heard back in the day, like back when Russia was, communist, they would get rid of people, even the people that agreed with them, but the people that actually like thought about the stuff. And if you're thinking about it, then they have to get rid of you because they know the party line changes based off of the winds of politics, and you're doing it based off of philosophy. Like you're doing the wrong model.
That's right. You're not kind of sound,
even
if you happen to have the right opinions at this moment. You're not a team player.
No, it's like, no, our party is like, we're right and everybody else is wrong, and that's the philosophy, and like that's the real philosophy, and then we're going to tell you what you need to say.
I had the similar experiences in my experiences in the corporate IT world, where one of my jobs at one point was to talk to business people and come up with estimates of time and cost and feasibility of doing various projects. And I went through a process of calibrating my project estimates. So they were pretty good. And I noticed that other people would come out with estimates were like wrong by a factor of 10, routinely. But I became quite unpopular because for that exact reason, that I was giving accurate estimates. And what they wanted actually as a team player was optimistic estimates. So, and it's not just like the bank that I work for, like Microsoft Word for Windows version 1.0 according to the book Rapid Development, took 6 years. But at no point did the project plan have an end date more than 12 months out.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So I don't know if you have any other sort of thoughts or ideas about how to do this sort of alchemist mode. Sorry?
The way of being of an alchemist.
Yeah, and how do you? So there's the idea of having lots of models, Kimmy, and being sort of radically open to what the world is telling you. The downside of that, as we kind of discussed, was that if you are radically open to the information that the world is telling you, you're liable to believe things that are unpopular in current year. And so you do have to be very careful. It's like this.
I did run into that problem. Like when I did the rationality thing, I took a logic course or before that.
Yeah.
And so I'm like thinking very much in terms of logic, and people are saying stuff, and I would say things that would be, missing. Like if you were using the rules of logic, what I said made sense and there was nothing bad about it. But if you're using the rules of people saying random stuff that comes in their head, or getting triggered, if you're using the rules of triggering, then
you're out.
Then it's super offensive and bad and all that stuff.
Yeah.
And I found, I think for the to move into paradigms is like if systemic level is what models are using to understand the world, paradigms are more what games are you playing in the world.
Yes.
And so you're going to, like, everything you do is a move in a game, and it exists across all games at all times. And so what game are you doing? Are you playing the game where you're trying to get your proposal accepted? And in that case, you got to like give the right answer, which is, we'll be done in 6 months and it'll be, small budget. Don't worry, everyone will be happy. We're not going to work so hard. And if you're playing the game of like, okay, like this project that we're doing actually matters, and like like these choices that we're doing matter, like this is like this world of meaning, then you're going to want to know what the truth is and to be able to like try to figure that out. But they're different games, and I don't know, I try not to judge, but obviously I judge a little.
And of course, but often it's what game is being played is often part of the game, or people lie about what game they're playing. So people will ostensibly make factual statements, which are not really meant to be factual statements, but they're more meant to be signals of virtue or goodness or affiliation. Or
parenting has made me much more open to these other games, because like I find often with my kid, I'm playing games and it's not really about the game. It's about spending time with him or teaching him like being good character traits and good, all these other things that are going on. And, if the ball doesn't go exactly where I want it to go, it doesn't really matter. It matters. All these other things matter much more.
Yeah, it's really, I was mentioning my daughter's 35. Parenting is just a fascinating thing. And just observing how people approach it. It's so often like people who I thought were quite liberal in their views, and they become a parent and they become these sort of absolute control freaks. That I know more than my child, and therefore I have to kind of micromanage my child's life. But the big job of a child is to learn, and you can't learn without trying things and making mistakes. And parents often have a sort of very prescriptive idea of how their child will end up. My child will be a feminist, or my child will be a whatever, Republican. Or a
computer programmer is really good at math and also an internet influencer.
Sorry? Yeah.
My thing is a computer programmer who's good at math and also an internet influencer. This is like my prescription that bounces around my head.
Yeah, but you have to accept what God gives you. This is like a very radically different idea, that the child, really owns their own life. I really strongly believe. Like one of my wife's friends said, our daughter's not planning to have any children. I was like, why did you make her have children? Like, how can you accept that? Blah blah. I sort of think it's her her life. So many things are kind of the thing that works well is often the opposite of what seems naturally to come to mind. So I'm just getting back to the
Alchemist.
alchemist.
I have ideas. I have theories.
Yeah. Okay.
So the way you talk about models,
Yeah.
kind of like that there's a real world and then there are the models, and you can kind of like slot the real world into the models or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
I think moving into alchemist realms, the real world is also a model. Like there's no like everything that's going on and the model that I'm like fitting things into. This one here also starts feeling like it's workable in a model. And that's kind of like alchemy, where things really feel quite magical, where this one, the one that I really live in, is also variable or maybe not variable, and that's weird. Why is it so rigid? And like this one is workable as well. I don't know if that makes any sense at all.
So much of what people do and so much of what goes on is really a function of the models that are in play.
Right. But maybe moving out of the models into the real world one. Or like I often have the experience that there's the real world, and then there's the model pops into my head of, oh, it's actually like we're doing a victim triangle in this moment. Like, but the real world is still here, but I'm like overlaying a victim triangle, or I'm like simplifying it down to a victim triangle for the next 5 minutes. And then I've kind of like taken the big real world and I've simplified it, and I'm only living in victim triangles. And there's a lot less depth to the world when I'm in that model. And so trying to like get out of that model back into the real one can bring back all that complexity and can bring back potentially the magic of being able to do things that other people can't see, because everyone else is caught in a model and I'm in the real world.
And a big part of that whole thing is sort of holding your models lightly,
right?
And your beliefs lightly. I remember I said to someone, I can't remember the context, but I said, I think such and such, but of course that's just my opinion. And like they just could not understand that comment. That obviously their view was that if you believe something, then you must fervently believe that to be true.
I mean, that's it as good epistemics, right? I know what an opinion is. I know what a belief is. I know what a theory is or a story is.
Signaling. Yeah.
Like I just know what's what. Like,
yeah,
I know what I saw, and that's not an opinion, but I know what my opinion is about what I saw. They're separate buckets, and I don't mix them. I'm like very careful about my epistemics of what's what.
Yeah, so he kind of was saying that he sort of felt that I had low self-esteem, kind of thing. Therefore I had that relationship to my opinions. And this came up, you guys are probably too young to remember the Chamberlain case, the Zaria Chamberlain, the baby who was taken by the dingo. And in the court case,
this is an Australia court case.
This was famous everywhere.
Yeah,
dingo got my baby.
And of course, the mother was convicted of murdering the baby and eventually exonerated. And now, in the trial, the jury did a lot of things wrong. They actually went off and did experiments on their own, which juries are not supposed to do. They sneaked in and sort of were playing with the tent and the lights and other. Anyway, one thing that happened was you had this very eminent forensic scientist, a professor, came out from the UK on the defence side, and he expressed himself in a very kind of shades of grey kind of way about things. And then you had this forensic pathologist, Joy Cool, who was really just a technician. And she was absolutely crystal clear and definite about everything, and also wrong. She concluded that there was this paint deadener, that it was actually dried blood containing fetal hemoglobin. But it was actually later shown to be actually paint deadener on the inside of the car. And, this was a big piece of evidence that showed that the mother had cut the baby's throat in the car. And the jury believed this woman because she was confident in her beliefs. And even though on any objective basis, she knew a tiny fraction of what this professor did. So there are kind of signalling benefits from being, sure of yourself. even though epistemically it's not.
Yeah. I see that all the time, like social groups where you, like there's I know this, like I have this one guy in my network who's very confident all the time, and like he's wrong most of the time, but like it just nobody like he just says it, the way he says it makes you think that he's right. And then
Yes.
when he's later shown to be wrong, like he doesn't apologize or take back or anything. He's just like says some other comment, like he just jumps to the next thing.
You're bringing to my mind, there's a book called Everything is Workable by Dianne Hamilton, and she's a Zen practitioner and she's also a mediator. And one of the things she talks about is as you develop like a nuance of complexity and shades of gray, you're actually you're terrible at advocating for yourself, and you're a terrible mediator, because you're like, oh, maybe I could work with that, or maybe I could accept that, or, you know, I'm not going to like that, but it's going to be okay. All of that compared to a really stubborn, and I'm going to be like a Trump who's like, I want this. Like, I'm actually very weak against that stubbornness because I have so much nuance and so much availability and movability in me. Like, I'm a terrible negotiator against someone who's really stubborn and possibly not developed or not clear on what they actually want. And that's very frustrating, and something to note about like people who are developing and developing greater complexity is they need to be very careful not to lose their self-advocacy, because they can also look at someone who's being stubborn and go, oh, they must be being stubborn for emotional reasons that are really important, whereas they could just be like surface stubborn and really not nuanced with the stubbornness. Because like what it would take for me to be stubborn is really like quite a strong emotional like backing behind me, but what it might take for someone else to be stubborn could be just that they've decided, and that's just kind of how it is today. But it's kind of like I'm aware of this pattern of not selling myself short just because I can nuance what I want, and I can dance around the truth, and I can sort of be more malleable. It's kind of dangerous.
It's sort of interesting. I was thinking how Nelson Mandela dealt with this sort of issue. In the film Invictus, the ANC hierarchy had decided to rename the Springboks, and which upset the whites. And he persuaded them to change the name back. And his argument was that, you know, we know better than they are. You know, it's if our view is like, now we're on top, we're going to stick it to them. We're just no better than that. But you're
just replaying that like oppressor oppressed.
It's the same
dynamic,
thing,
just different colors.
Exactly. So he went along to a Springboks game, and the Springboks, I think, eventually ended up winning the World Cup. He went along to a Springboks game, and he walked out of the field wearing a Springboks Guernsey.
The opposite team, obviously.
Which was the South African team.
Sorry, Springboks is the sports
South
team?
African side, South African rugby union side.
Oh.
So the Springboks, so they were a sort of signal of white nationalism. And so he went to this game and walked out onto the field with the Springboks jumper on. And that was so it was a kind of symbolic way for him to say the Springboks are now the South African side.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't like say this, he just showed it symbolically. But then when he got out in the middle of the pitch, he put his sort of black power fist up.
Mm-hmm.
And kind of somehow united that. So, you know, in some ways you can do these things symbolically in a way that you can't necessarily put into explicit, you know, verbal formulations.
Right. I think like some of that for me is that he's living his truth. He's being the change he wants to see in the world.
Yes, exactly.
And now you have this like very famous Black leader wearing this uniform. You know, it's very hard to say, oh, like he's a white supremacist. Like now, like it's very hard to say Nelson Mandela is a white supremacist. And so he can kind of get away with doing whatever he wants. And then whatever he does, therefore, is just like is him doing that. It doesn't mean the meaning's not bigger than him. It's whatever other meaning is now gets sucked into his frame.
yeah, so he had developed such enormous credibility across the
And
whole.
he was in jail for years.
Sorry?
He was in jail for years.
That's right. For many,
for his cause, he was in jail, and so when he got out, obviously he was he had done the time required to advocate for his side. There's no sneezing on that.
And just to say, Václav Havel had been in prison several times, by the communist authorities, and that was part of his sort of credibility, that he didn't have to prove anything. So that's perhaps part of it as well, that you can kind of symbolize things.
So yeah, alchemist feels like I mean, I suppose there's also like there's the models that, like, I'll be sitting in a group of people and suddenly the victim triangle will pop into my head and I'll be like, oh, this probably fits. And that's kind of like an experience of receiving the model from my thought stream or whatever, receiving the model and interacting with it. I suspect an alchemist is starting to get active with those models, like instead of just receiving the model, going like, what model would have me win or have the most change in this room, and like bring a model and start trying to live it, or start trying to have it more active to start to shift the room. Like maybe sitting here noticing, oh, I like that person more than that person. Oh, wait a second, what if I switch that? Like, oh, that might actually change the room because I start acting like, the other one's my favorite or something like that.
Yeah, perhaps sort of combining them and mixing them up.
Something proactive with the models, rather than kind of like, I have a lot of experience of just being passive receiver of models, but I wonder if like that active participatory with the models would be a more powerful move. Which of course, for a while, every time I'd read a new book, I do Man with a Hammer, right? Have you seen spiral dynamics everywhere? And have you seen getting things done everywhere? And have you seen How to Win Friends and Influence everywhere? Every time I read so there's a way in which it wasn't there before I read the book, and then suddenly it was everywhere. So there's actually a lot of freedom for choosing models, or like applying models that weren't there a moment ago. So there probably is a lot of more opportunity to look for maybe a model that brings everyone joy, or brings us all together more, or like I don't need to just rely on the model that came to mind. I can look for the model that really makes a difference in this moment. And there's something of like a proactive move there.
The whole sort of model du jour thing, and I remember I went through that with Robert Kegan's models, which I think are terrific models. It is just incredible to me how many people just really neatly slot into one of those zones. And it kind of tells you a vast amount about the person, so they're useful.
Right, but being able to proactively create that, and maybe like if I grab for Kegan's model for a moment, if I've slotted someone into say level 3, right, that may simplify or reduce them down to a 3 and but if I can like try and like, what if they were a 5 acting like a 3 for this moment? And if I can, obviously they might only be a 3, and that's okay, but if I can map them upwards, then maybe I can see a greater nuance or greater complexity in the world that was a moment ago just missing because I wasn't tuning in, wasn't trying to see it. No, they'll still be acting like a 3, but if they have, survival strategies keeping them at 3, or if they have multi-generational family relational stuff that they're carrying that is keeping them acting like this, like there's a chance for a lot more complexity in each moment, rather than keeping them at the 3.
And a big part of the whole alchemist thing is being able to meet people at their level,
right,
and then make the best of who they are. So just might be worth just explaining briefly the levels.
Sure.
So level 2 is more basically the primary school child, and they're rather self-centered. They regard other people in an instrumental fashion. They have friends, but they're basically people who are useful to them because they need someone to play cricket with or whatever. So that's the level 2. And girls tend to go out of that about the age of 10, boys at the age of about 13. Then level 3 is the teenager. And teenagers are sort of obsessed with the social world. And suddenly, like, as I remember one young man said to me that he was extremely grateful that he grew up in a time and place where his peer group had correct views about all matters of importance. I tried not to, because the reason he thinks his peer group has these correct views is because they're his peer group's views in my hypothesis. And women, it's interesting, women tend to go into the teenage years earlier, but they tend to come out of them later. And it's usually sometimes in the 20s. Men come out of them tend a bit earlier to the next level, which is the rational adult. So that's the Kegan's adult level. And beyond the adult, but the thing is, the adult more or less has their own individual opinions, and they can actually get on with people with different views. Whereas the teenagers, you know, you're either, you know, you're in
our gang or you're not in our gang.
Like at boarding school, there were the kind of pointy heads and the animals, and you couldn't be friends across that divide. The animals, that's what they called themselves.
Animal?
They call themselves the animal.
These were like 2 social circles in your school?
Yeah.
Right.
The animals were kind of like the sons of the farm boys kind of thing, at a first approximation. They're kind of like, there's this sort of hillbilly area on just the other side of the Great Dividing Range which was first settled in Australia.
Oh, it's Australian stuff. This is cool.
Yeah, so they're kind of a bit analogous to hillbillies. You know, they've sat there for 200 years and bred with one another and so forth. So that's my brother's hypothesis. It seems to fit. So people are very factionalized, and like a lot of people. So then you've got the adult who has their own opinion. They can be friends. You know, they can be a Republican, be friends with a Democrat or whatever. That can happen. And then beyond the adult level, but the adults have their own opinions, but they think their opinions are true. The postmodern, which is the next level up, they have opinions, but they're just sort of hypotheses. You know, they're quite open to the fact that they're just their opinion or whatever. So that's the kind of levels as I see them. But you know, up to the adult level, people think their opinions are true. Yeah. So that's
one detail from retreat. I'm gonna diverge for a moment. One of the things we played with on retreat was projection.
Yeah.
And I have this maybe like an interesting confusion that there are things that I project that are clearly like, oh, I see you as kind of like a witch, and like you're a bit cranky old lady witch, like, you know, that's I can put that projection on. And then there's something else that feels much more real, like even the difference between witch and cranky, right? I know what I saw. I know I saw some crankiness, like, and there's the projection layer, and then there's this other layer that like is something in between. Like, it's not a projection anymore, but it's not absolutely reality, because I suspect the other person won't say, oh yes, I was being cranky. But there's some other more real than a projection, but less real than absolute reality. And I'm like kind of confused about this. Like, where do projections start and end, and where does reality start and end? Especially for like, maybe I'm saying something about another person, like saying something about myself. I will know a little bit more, like where with the ground of reality up to like some level of complexity. But about someone else, chances are I'm starting to make it up after a while. Anyway, that's something I'm sort of playing with. Like, I'm not making the mistakes that I used to make in terms of projection on other people and then treating them as true, and then like not liking a person because I had that projection on them. But I'm now confused about this like in between level where I saw the crankiness, but I know I can't say it because it won't be received all that well. Or
yeah, this is like cross paradigmatic, I think, or this is like alchemy level, I think.
Well, I don't know.
And
it's also like I trust my intuition when it says that person was cranky. I'm like certain of my experience of the crankiness.
We actually did an exercise, didn't we, on like actually owning up to your projections.
Yeah.
with people, or some barrier that appears to be between two people. We had to go up to the person and say, I think there's this barrier between us. So like this woman came up to me and said, oh, you remind me of my father, and not in a good way.
That's hard.
So
to the extent that it's true, it's kind of nice to get it in the air and then clear it, or like be honest about the fact that it's there.
yeah, that's right, because I don't think I was very actually much like her father, actually. But yeah, it was sort of interesting to kind of be in those clothes kind of thing somehow. So
that was, I mean, I found with because we did all this family constellation work, kind of various people got to play the role for someone else's constellation. Like, you are my mom, you are my brother, you are my grandmother. And so we kind of got to wear those clothes for and we stayed with it for a day or two. Sometimes we got to continue to wear the clothes of the other people in someone's life, as well as our ordinary clothes.
Yes.
I found that quite interesting, just realizing how many layers of clothing we might be wearing as we walk through life for different people. And
towards the end, we actually got the person to formally free them from those roles.
Right.
And it was actually a thing.
It
does sort of hang on you.
Right.
Those
kind of like energetic something or other. My experience,
I've never done this stuff. I feel like I'm playing these roles now because I'm a dad, and so I have to do the dad role. And it is weird clothing to wear sometimes.
I mean, for the constellation, it was kind of, so we had an area maybe a couple of meters by a couple of meters where we did the play in. We got everyone to stand around in that area, and then so you stand there, you're like, I don't know how to play this character particularly, but I'm gonna see how it goes. And then you're standing there, and then you look at the person next to you, you're like, ugh, and you're like, you want to move away from them. That was my experience, right? I'm like, I don't want to be near that person. And then that person reached out to grab me, and so then I jumped twice. And I'm like, oh, I'm having this experience where that person wanted to grab me, because obviously I'm playing a relationship in this the director's life. And then I'm like, I don't want to be grabbed. And it's something to do with either the way the person grabbed for me, or the energetic relationship that I was playing out, or the character I was playing, that I just went, I don't want to be grabbed. And I took a step to the side really quick. And then that was perfect, for the role I was playing, they were playing. That's there's these, I'm standing there going, I don't know what to do. And then these subtle things, suddenly I'm like, yeah, I don't really like that person, or kind of want to go over there, or I want to turn away from this person. Many things, these little hints just become possible for me to start acting out. That's kind of what it's like.
One thing that was really good about that was that doing this in an explicit way, I found, going back into normal life, or even in the retreat, you kind of notice these things happening spontaneously, and in normal life you're not really aware of them, but just you have an interaction with someone, and you suddenly realize they're not interacting with you. Right. They're interacting with some projection that you sort of create in them, or that that they've conjured up, or whatever. So it makes you much more aware of these sort of trances that we kind of drift through.
This is kind of one thing I've been thinking about as well. Yeah. It sometimes feels like there isn't enough room for the two of us on this island. Kind of we're both in some moment, we're big personalities, or we're grating against the edges of each other. And somehow the way that the person said a thing was insulting to me, and there isn't enough space for the two of our opinions on this island. And that can feel very true. And then also I have an experience of vastness, where we're so far away from each other that we can never be big enough to even touch each other. I kind of have both of these, despite being in the room with you, that you're all the way over there sitting on the other couch, that whatever you say will never actually touch me, because we're just so different. We're so far away. We've lived massively different lifetimes. And that one's kind of lonely. and then being too close is kind of like dangerous as well, like because I can get hurt or we can attack each other, because if we can really touch each other, we can attack each other. And somewhere in the middle is the enjoyable, possible, transformative way to be with someone that is like we're close enough that we're getting the intimacy, but far enough away that we can't hurt each other. Like, it's a very interesting little experience.
One thing that was very notable in the retreat was the people who'd been on a few retreats before seemed, quite comfortable from the first minute kind of thing. I'm going to, with the disclosure and so forth. And the people who were new, they sort of had two reactions. One person, just kind of went for it for about a day and a half. And then all of a sudden you could just see this person thinking, oh my God, what have I done? I've disclosed, and they went into a kind of this shell for about a day and a half, just like in a sort of panic. And then they were like, oh, actually, it's okay. But, there is this feeling of, in the general world, of being unsafe to disclose.
Mm.
You're
I saw that dynamic come up a whole bunch. We had the people who were kind of the opinion, I can't be free to be myself unless I control my environment enough to make it safe enough that I can be myself, express myself, be whoever I want to be, which means that no one's allowed to yell in the room, right? No one's allowed to do certain things in this room because otherwise I won't be safe.
Yeah.
Then you've got the other side of people going like, don't tell me what to do. Don't control me. Don't like impose any rules on me, because that's like preventing me from being who I want to be.
Yeah.
Right. I don't want to be controlled by you. I don't want to have to like hold back because you can't handle it. Like, and somehow, I mean, we spent days of like trying to navigate the nuance of these two positions that just they didn't fit together. Right? And I think eventually we got like a bit of space in between them, and we allowed people to have their own experience without it having to impact other people, or maybe we didn't, I don't know. But that was just a really interesting, like, don't help me, don't stop me from having negative experience, and on one side, and on the other side, we have to make sure everyone's okay, and we have to protect everyone. And this is just a fascinating bind that we found ourselves in this room.
Yeah, it's sort of interesting the way people sort of create the situations that they need to heal or whatever, or need to deal with. I remember in my first retreat, I think pretty sure it was the first one, and I went around and basically pissed off everyone. And I successfully, completely, like, to me, I was like, what are you people talking about? Like, I'm just being friendly or blah, blah, blah. But I was creating this situation from my family that I was the designated bad guy.
Mm.
And I successfully created this situation where everyone ganged up on me and sort of condemned me. But you see people doing this sort of all the time, and they're like doing it. You can see that they're doing it, and they have no idea that they're doing it. They're like, what happened? I was just blah, blah, blah. But it then creates a situation that can be, then dealt with in a safe sort of context. So that's part of the sort of power of it, that, people somehow feel safe enough to do those things, even when they don't realize they're doing it. It was the most, I still remember that quite vividly. I was just like flabbergasted. How did this happen when I was being so nice? So I think, you shouldn't necessarily go on a retreat like that if you're under enormous psychological duress. I think, for example, if you've just sort of broken up with your, wife of 20 years a week ago, it might not be the time.
Yeah, there's definitely a variety of things that don't fit in one of those containers. Also, like, maybe because that, like just going through and breaking up with your wife of 20 years would just kind of be overpowering.
Yeah.
Like, what you need in that container is quite a lot, and everyone in that container needs to get stuff, and we don't want one person completely overpowering the container. We want everyone to get something out of it, and so through no fault of anyone, we want everyone to get something out of it, and so we should have maybe some balance. At the same time, I asked Jesse about like having very loud or outspoken or very talkative people, and how that can play out. And he basically said that it's a good thing because they trigger everyone else and everyone else finds their stuff. And then, the person, and then there's some like rebalancing required in the container, but everyone sort of has it better because there's some rocking of the boat. But with no rocking of the boat, it can be more difficult to find people's stuff.
Yeah, so there's that balance of, how many chilies do you need
Right.
happening. So maybe I might tell you about the first hot seat in the first retreat that I did. So they had this idea of a hot seat, which is basically someone would sit in the middle, and Jesse kind of modeled it. And the idea was you put up your hand and say how many chilies you want, like how tough do you want the questions to be. And now you're supposed to be able to refuse to answer a question, but Jesse didn't actually model this, refusing to answer a question. So everyone kind of implicitly felt you had to answer the question. So I mentioned before with the question that I think it was actually before we started recording, I asked this woman some very personal questions about her sexuality, and she got quite upset with me, and because she'd been triggering me in this way. And we eventually, like towards the end of the retreat, we had a hug and it was all good. But I said, like immediately after the hot seat, I made the comment that I had disclosed some things that I didn't actually want to disclose. And I felt a bit of regret. And so I felt bad at the time, and no one kind of backed me up or said that they had a similar thing. And I thought, oh, okay. So that night I went to bed, had a good night's sleep, woke up feeling great, and then I show up the next morning and all hell's broken loose. Everyone's really upset about their hot seat, that they disclosed things they didn't want and the questions were out of order and blah, blah, blah. And like I think 3 people had packed their bags, ready to go. Jesse took it all very calmly and sort of talked everyone down, and it was sort of good, but he'd kind of overdone the, chilies factor. And I think when we did it again, I think he modeled refusing to answer a question, or someone did anyway, because, everyone has got a limit of what they're prepared to sort of disclose it. But it was so funny the next morning. I woke up and the birds were singing and the sun was shining and all was well with the world for me, because I think I had kind of processed my mixed feelings at the time. But obviously other people had allowed it to fester for a day or so. So that, but as I said, on all the 7 retreats, only one person actually went home, and that was a person who was in a situation in their personal life of great, stress and difficulty. So it's a terrific experience, because you just feel, you have that safety. And the bigger trick, I think, is to be able to access those things, and then you can sort of process them. But probably the most heartfelt moment was this guy hearing the person playing the role of his father say how sorry he was for abandoning him and so forth. And it just seems to have been completely transformative for him. I don't know if you had the same impression, but
yeah, I think that was a very powerful moment.
And he seems to, because he was kind of stuck in that mode. My father needs to apologize. People often get in that. I had a friend from boarding school who was in a similar kind of situation. He wasn't at the retreat, but he made contact with me, and he had some very bad experiences with boarding school, with imagining hazing taken to the ultimate degree kind of thing in an all-male boarding school, and he was just stuck on the fact that someone needed to acknowledge the fact that he was wronged, and he just couldn't get past it. Like eventually, I just stopped talking to him, because every conversation was basically the same thing again and again. So our friend at the retreat seems to have been able to get past that, whereas previously it struck me as just having been totally stuck. So that's all that really comes to mind from me about the retreat. Have you got any other stories about it, or?
I just had one come to mind that there was some of the conversation that went on was about intimacy, where someone walked into the retreat and was like, I know all about intimacy. I just did a thing last weekend. I feel very confident about it. And then by the end of the retreat, they were like, I have no idea what intimacy is anymore. Which, that person would have no problem also saying a similar thing. But there was like, if I think about which of the moments of the retreat were like the powerful moments, even like forget intimacy, just the powerful moments, it was the most uncomfortable moments, or the most triggering moments, or the scariest moments, or the people nearly got into a fight, or those moments were the most profound moments. And here I am trying to train myself to be a better adult, how to never have to get hurt ever again. And there's this maybe if I get some more bottles, then I'll have a better buffer and I'll never have to get hurt. And I have this sort of process in my head, if only I could be a better facilitator, then I'll never get hurt, or everything will be okay. I can keep myself safe. And at the same time, somehow all of that is moving in the opposite direction, because what I want to be doing is getting more vulnerability and more intimacy and more closeness and more profound experience, which is the worst thing ever. It's going to hurt. It's going to be hell. It's going to be uncomfortable. It's going to be scary. And somehow I keep training myself to not do that as much as I can, and that's where all the good stuff is. So I don't know what to do about that.
Yeah, and often the thing that is the best is the thing that you really don't want to do somehow. The thing that feels comfortable is often low value, and the thing that feels a bit dangerous and so forth. There was one funny thing that came up out of one of the early retreats, is that one of the participants shared that what they wanted in an intimate relationship was that they wanted total closeness, openness, and intimacy, and that the previous relationship that they'd had broken up on that basis, that the other person just, or in their story anyway, was just not up for that they wanted a certain amount of distance. And I went home after the retreat and I said to my wife, that's what I want, I want no barrier, when we're in bed together, it's just we are, there's just nothing. And my wife just completely freaked out.
It also sounds very terrifying. I'm on both sides of that, right? I want the intimacy, and also I never want to be that close to someone that I'm going to get hurt. Terrifying.
And as far as I know, she's never been hurt romantically. She claims I was her first boyfriend, but nonetheless, the intimacy can be very terrifying, as well as seen with the hot seat, where people were disclosing things. And
that's kind of one of my ongoing confusions of how is it that the thing that I want in terms of vulnerability, intimacy, powerful moments of connection and realization is also the thing that I want the least of, that I want to move away from and never get near, my vulnerable hurt self. I don't want to let that out somehow.
Well, it's a bit like someone said, that life is really about maintaining this sort of balance between boredom and terror.
Right. Yeah, I feel it.
I think Elon Musk is probably a little bit on the terror side of the equation at the moment. Yeah. But
it's also how many people do I know who are on the bottom side? And I'm I wish you'd do something with your life.
Yeah, and of course they've been hurt or whatever. So it's.
I find myself saying this phrase every couple of days, but I say everyone's got stuff. Everyone's got stuff.
Yeah. So Daniel, can I just get your input on this? So when you hear about our experiences with the retreat, are you thinking, my God, thank God I've never have to go on one of those things, or you think, I've got to do this?
No, I'm absorbing, because I want to be doing retreats at some point, and I've been on retreats as well. We've done stuff, to think better, and and I've done some base Hilo stuff, but it's like been still much more. The Think Better stuff, I had a lot of like it was mostly just people that were able to do these things on some level, and so the whole retreat was just like the people there were able to already like comfortable and already done these kinds of things before.
Yeah.
And then my base Hilo retreats have been less intense. So I'm trying to I really like I do love these things. Like I love like these like hot, like this hot seat thing is like very, that was in one of the first psychotechs I got exposed to when I came to Toronto. We did on the AA retreat.
I mean, the last time I ran a hot seat exercise, someone came up to me after and said, I realized that the questions people ask are a lot more about them than the person answering.
Yeah.
You know, like obviously we ask questions that are about us more than it is about the person answering the question, which is, you know, there's actually complexity going on there.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. So I know Jesse does fly all around the world, and do retreats all over the place. Yeah. So that's about all I can think of in relation to the retreats.
Yeah, I mean, this is great. Like I often find it's very hard to describe a retreat, and like even the best I have is these little anecdotes of like this happened and then that happened. I mean, that was another interesting one, like the food stuff. So I kind of overcatered, and it wasn't like massively over, like I didn't have double food, but I had like maybe 1.2 or 1.3 times as much food as I needed. And I talked about it, and myself and another person in the room sort of had multi-generational trauma around food, and that came out quite powerfully, and you know, had some relating about that whole like, oh yeah, I do this because of my family. And that was just, it was great to be able to say that in front of the group. Yeah. So these little anecdotes are the only way that I can talk about the retreat.
Yeah. It's that's, I remember you talking about that, Elliot. And you know, it is interesting. Rob, John Bradshaw has this exercise in one of his books about, you know, sort of mapping these sort of multi-generational traumas and you know, some of these like internal family systems, hang-ups that get transmitted from generation to generation. Yeah, so that is a thing, and they can go on for, you know, looking at my family, some of these things have lasted like 4 generations. So yes, it can be things. So hopefully we haven't turned too many people off the retreats, because they can be a marvelous experience, and very interesting. The main thing that I love about it is that your whole self is involved. You know, they're not just a cerebral thing. It's not just emotion. It's not just your body, or even your spirituality. We didn't talk about that much, but there was that as well. And you know, being there as a whole person with other people in their wholeness.
I mean, one thing I found interesting, even from the first retreat, was that like one way to run a retreat is to put everyone in the container and sort of from the outside stir the pot and stuff, like you. But that does, in this particular, in the way that Jesse runs this, it doesn't seem like he's outside of the pot stirring. It seems like he's in the pot mixing with us, and that's like a different model of leadership, like leadership from the outside or leadership from above. It feels like, you know, all I learn is how to control things from above, which I don't need. I don't actually need more of that. I need the leadership that is being with people, that is learning to be transformative from the like the peer group, from the like next to people place, which is incredibly powerful. And it's always been like that. That's why I keep coming back to this particular container.
Yeah, and Jesse's definitely a participant. I know on a few of the retreats, people have kind of attacked him quite trenchantly. You know, that you're a very manipulative person. You just love playing with ants, kind of thing, and you know, it's all for the money, and like presumably most of it's projections. But you know, if any of it hit the spot, it would be very painful. So yeah. All right.
Yeah, I mean, this is a good time to wrap up. Did you have more
Yeah.
to say, Daniel?
I was going to comment on the leadership. It's like that leading from the front where like the unit will elect someone from their own to be the leader. Versus, like, so it's like bottom up versus top down. And it sounds like Jesse is leading it and then also like putting his own self on the line, which I really respect, where sometimes people are like, okay, like I'm gonna like what am I'm risking other people, I'm not risking myself. And if you're there in the mix, like you're risking your own things, your own traumas and your own stuff that's going on, and you have to be well enough and you have to be wholesome enough to be able to actually be there and be aware of everything and make good decisions and not get triggered, or at least dealing with your triggers well.
Yes, that's true. And I think, you have to be kind of a big human being to pull this sort of thing off. And he does seem to have that capacity, and he's done all the work. So it, in that sense, it's he's definitely a participant, and he's definitely it's a lot of what makes it work, I think, is his sort of charisma, or if you want to call it that.
I would have said presence. He seems to carry a presence about him.
Yes.
Which helps.
And I've always felt in all my interactions with him that he's sort of completely sincere and responsive and kind of open to me, that he's with me. That's really an unusual thing. Not very few people are like that. You feel they're sort of zoning off into some daydream of their own or some issue of their own or whatever. But he just does seem to be always with you. So, all right. Well, that was a lot of fun. So,
yeah. Now that seems like a good time to wrap up.
Yeah. Okay.